Hello, this is John Hyatt. I'm the son of Jim and Margaret Hyatt, missionaries to Papua. So I started making this series of videos of stories about our experiences there. And so this is the second installment. Uh, my wife says I have to tell this story. This story is called The Cat Story in the family. It's been told many times. So, if you're really sensitive about animal rights, you might not want to watch this one. So, the story begins with my father noticing that the diet of the Au people that we worked with was lacking in protein. They had no kind of animal husbandry of any kind. They did not keep cattle or even pigs the way the people in the mountains did. And so my dad had an idea to start a program to teach the people to raise chickens. So the plan was fairly simple. Dad bought a bunch of chickens, and the people who signed up to be part of the program were given one rooster and two hens, with the understanding that after uh, the uh, the chickens began to produce eggs and more chickens, that they would return to the program two hens and one rooster, so that it could be given to somebody else. So it was quite successful. Uh, Many of the people began raising chickens. We also had a cat. The cat was both a pet and useful in a farmyard way because we had several storage facilities that contained food such as sacks of rice and so forth. And we needed to keep rats and other pests out. And so the purpose of the cat was to deal with the rat problem. And it was a good cat. It was a good pet, and it was a very effective mouser. So all was well. Until one day, some natives showed up at my father's door and sheepishly or somewhat embarrassed told my dad, Tuan, your cat is killing our chickens. And so Dad looked into it, and sure enough, the cat had developed a habit that it would catch the chickens and bite off just the head and leave the headless body of the chicken lying there. I don't know if the cat actually ate the chicken's head or not, but it would behead the chickens. And it had done this multiple times to the point where it was a problem. So my father, knowing cats and knowing how impossible it would be to change this behavior, my father passed the death sentence upon the cat. So the question was how to do that. So Dad uh, had trapped rabbits as a child, and when they would get the rabbit out of the rabbit trap, they would take the rabbit by the hind feet and whop its head on the side of the box to dispatch the rabbit. And Dad thought he could do the same thing with the cat. So he picked up the cat and he went to the water tower behind our house where we had big ironwood posts that held up the water system. And he grabbed the cat by the hind legs and attempted to swing the cat and hit the cat's head against the ironwood post. It did not work. So the cat was very agile, and it balled up and clawed my dad and tore itself loose from his grasp, and it ran into our storehouse or gudang. So Dad was not deterred. So the weapons we had to deal with a situation like this were limited. As foreigners, we were not allowed to have any type of firearms, of course. So the only thing that we had was the native bow and arrow. So here is an example of the weapon that my father had to use. This is a typical Papuan arrow. It's about 6 feet long. The bow is about the same length. And it has a very nasty barbed tip on it. Another thing is that on these arrows, the head often fairly easily separates from the shaft. So that played into this. Dad went into the storehouse or the gudang with his bow and arrow in search of the cat. And he saw the cat passing between two 55-gallon drums, broadside. So he drew back his bow and shot his arrow, and he hit the cat. He hit the cat, and he said amidships, in the middle of the body, I guess the abdomen or something. But as the cat was wounded and it, ran and howled, the arrow head separated from the shaft, and apparently the arrow head was far enough through the cat that it caught on something and it pulled out. So the cat had a pretty serious wound, but the arrow was pulled out. And the cat ran out of the warehouse, the gudang, and ran toward the jungle at a pretty high rate of speed. So my dad called the Bible school boys. This was in Nohon, and the Bible school was in Nohon, and said, guys, I've shot the cat, but it escaped and it's run for the jungle. Could you go and see if you can collect it? I mean, it's sure to die soon, but I'd like to get it back and bury it. So they went after the cat, and they came back a couple hours later, and they said, Tuan, we can't get it. It's too deep. It's too deep in the thick jungle. It's gone where we can't penetrate into that area. I said, okay. So Dad just expected that the cat would die pretty quickly and this story would be ended. But it didn't. So the cat actually ran into an area that was not far from our house. And so as my mom and dad were laying in bed at night, they could hear the yowling of the wounded cat in the jungle. And my mom said to my dad, Jim Hyatt, you're the meanest man I've ever known. So, but after a while, the noise stopped. And Dad just assumed the cat was dead. I mean, that was just the natural way of things. The cat should be dead. Dad figured the cat was dead. And then one day, as he was out in the yard around the house, he saw the cat. It was out on the edge of the jungle, and it was prowling around, and there's no doubt it was the cat. So Dad figured, well, I failed to kill it. I guess I got to feed it. So Dad put out food. And the next morning, the food was gone. And so he did that several times more, and the cat began to come back around the house and eat the food, although it was very shy at first, did not want to be around people. Um, but it grew more and more accustomed to its old ways. So one day Dad was sitting on the porch of the house on the steps reading his Bible, and he felt something rub up against his leg. And he looked down. It was the cat. Well, when Dad passed the death sentence, it was like the law of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not. The death sentence was still the death sentence, and he was determined to carry it out. But he chose a different method. So he picked up the cat. He actually pet the cat. The cat got to purring, picked up the cat into his lap. And then he called the Bible school boys and he said, "Get me a burlap sack and 2 axe heads." So they came back with that. Dad holding the cat and the sack, and in a wink, the cat was in the sack. And the 2 axe heads were put in as well for weight, and he tied up the mouth of the bag. So he said to the Bible school boys, "Boys, let's go to the river." So he walked down to the place that was their bathing place, like a swimming hole, Tempat Mandi. So we went they went down there, and as they got to the edge, and Dad swung the bag and threw it out in the middle of the swimming hole, and bubbles came up. And so he sent one of the Bible school boys out there to pick up the bag. As this was going on, Dad said, "In my village in America, we have a saying that a cat has 9 lives." He said, so there was a farmer in my village, and he had the same problem. He had a cat that was killing his chickens, and so he had to get rid of the cat. And so, similar to me, he tried shooting it. He tried, many different methods to kill it. And yet every morning after the attempt, the cat came back across the barnyard. Until he got to that 8th time. The 8th time he was determined to get rid of the cat, and so he took the cat to the woodshed and he cut off its head and threw the cat's body into the bushes. And the Bible school boys were fascinated, and they were hanging on every word of this story. And Dad said the next morning, the cat came back across the barnyard with its head in its mouth. And they went, "Ah!" And they went, the boy who had the bag threw the bag. They ran out off down the trail into the jungle. So Dad went out and picked up the bag and carried it to the bank and buried the cat. After maybe 15, 20 minutes, the Bible school boys came creeping back. And they stood around and I said, "Tuan, we have a question for you. How did that cat get its head in its mouth?"